So, by way of introduction, my name is Jason Webster. I'm the CEO and founder of Archetype. So, super excited to be here and spending some time with the crowd talking about I think a relatively interesting topic. About 8 years ago, Archetype had our headquarters right upstairs. And so we spent roughly 5 years upstairs in the office space. And this floor was broken up into a bunch of cubicles. Not interesting, not a fun place to hang out. But we had the pleasure of hearing them demolish everything on the 5th floor to build this just in time for COVID. And we moved out. So now here we are back again and able to hang out with our friends at the Legacy Club. And we're super excited to have this chance to share the Legacy Club with you all. So let's jump in. So if I can figure out how to use my mouse here. There we go. The breakdown of the time is basically going to be a quick overview from myself, which I've been told to keep it short and sweet, which I will. And then kind of go through an introduction to generative AI and LLMs. I think these are terms we've heard a lot about, but to try to provide some clarity and conciseness as to what's happening there and what it means in the short term and long term. And then have some hands-on time on looking at large language models thanks to our partners at Dataiku and Snowflake. So let's just jump in. So I think there's a... Am I going the wrong way? There we are. We're working. So I think suffice it to say, over the last 5-10 years, the role of data has changed dramatically. Data is no longer what we used to think of it, where data was the measure of things. It was the scoreboard. It had no role in the game. It was basically the score and the time left on the scoreboard. It tracked your timeouts, it tracked your fouls or penalties, but in general, it wasn't part of the game. I think it's easy to say, without having to be too convincing, that that's no longer the case, and data is now part. It's no longer measuring value, it's creating value. Data now predicts, drives, recommends, matches, informs, and frankly, it's a central part to a number of business models. So for instance, my kids are going to likely grow up in a world where this is not a common occurrence or a familiar sight, because we have replaced yellow cabs with a software program that's run from an Android or Apple platform. Moving people around is now a problem of data and analytics. Uber, to restate the obvious, Uber is constantly telling the drivers where to go to pick up potential passengers. It's adjusting the pricing on the fly based on the number of potential guests, repricing both what the route is, but also providing faster routes where it can. And being in Boston, we can point in 5 different directions to other businesses that have redesigned a particular industry by using data as a starting point, not the ending point, and not just a course of measurement. But kind of jumping forward, fast forwarding them all a little bit, we can look at a hype cycle. Now, this is probably hard to see in terms of the details, so I'll point for you guys. But a hype cycle is a way to kind of tell a story around technology. The technology, new ideas come to the market, and they start as a relatively low value with low impact. Expectations are low, and then some event happens, and all of a sudden the buyers, the market sees that there's a potential impact here, and it starts to climb this peak of inflated expectations. So as things climb up, they get to a point where, hey, this is something that can really change the world. So if you look right at the top of that peak up there, you see generative AI, which is right at the top of that crest, which means that there's a ton of interest, a ton of excitement around generative AI, thanks mostly to OpenAI and ChatGPT. But in general, just to remind you guys, that is a factor of a multiple of different things that have happened over the last 20 years, starting with first-person player games like Call of Duty or like similar games where these big math problems, linear algebra, was created to help people watch a player move across different environments online. That same math is what's behind GPT-4 today. So we see that we're standing on the shoulders of other applications, but today generative AI is probably the most exciting topic there is. But being at the top of the mountain, it can be great. The views are great from there. You've worked hard to get there. You can pat yourself on the back, but the only place to go from there is down. And so the typical hype cycle, we see once technologies have hit the peak, they start to move down towards this trough of disillusionment. And generally what drives the disillusionment is, hey, we think if we just buy a little bit of this generative AI and we spice our meal with it, it's going to make everything taste better. And if we're doing financial reporting, let's have generative AI in our financial reporting. If we're doing customer integration, let's use it for that. If we're doing HR, let's use it for that. If we're doing new product development, let's ask ChatGPT what we need to do for our next product. And very quickly, companies realize that that's not a strategy. It's frankly quite the opposite. It's the lack of a strategy where you give your business to ChatGPT in the same way our high school kids are giving their essays to ChatGPT. So we find that some of these technologies don't actually survive the trough of disillusionment, but some do. And if they do beyond that, we see this slope of enlightenment to the plateau of productivity. So this graph here is from Gartner. And Gartner's kind of saying they expect that generative AI is probably 2 to 5 years away from that plateau of productivity, which fundamentally means that the market understands what it can do, what it can't do, and that's more important sometimes. And they figured out how to develop use cases that can be used once and repeated elsewhere and drive real value, typically to bottom line. So one more quick graph. This is from McKinsey. So we've got 2 bars here, responders at AI high performers. So basically AI high performers are companies that would attribute 20% or more of their profit to some AI investment. So you can imagine companies like Google or companies like Uber, right? They use AI pervasively throughout their business model. But many businesses don't use AI at all in that context, or if they use AI, they can't attribute any change in profitability to AI. The right column says everyone else. So you look here and say, okay, is AI reducing costs? 19% of businesses see that that's where the value is. But if you look at the creation of new business and source of revenue, that 23% compares to 12% in the regular group. So double the percentage of impact of AI is seen in organizations that have made an investment and recognize that AI actually needs to be built over time. So those companies who've said, hey, we believe in data science, we're making investments, and we've made those investments starting a few years back. Now that AI technology platform has grown, and we now have generative AI, and those are similar technologies, we're ready to take advantage of it. And those who are in that state are seeing a double return in terms of revenue and a significant higher increase of revenue from their core business. So making their core business more profitable and adding new sources of revenue on top of that. That's the biggest impact. Now, again, the difference is companies who've been investing in AI for a period of time, that they've actually established the platform and infrastructure to get there. This is not something you just turn on one day. Yeah, you can go to ChatGPT and turn it on, but that's someone else's model they've trained. So the investment is worth it over time, significantly. So again, Captain Obvious says that market volatility is going to tip the competitive landscape in the favor of those who are nimble and innovative. And those organizations who are nimble and innovative have started investing in data science and similar technologies years ago. They're seeing the returns. And ChatGPT, while it's woken a lot of people to this opportunity, and it seems like it's the first palatable investment to make, that's your start, you're a little bit behind the curve because the leaders have been investing in similar ways for the past several years. So I love this metaphor. We all know what it is. It's a light switch. It has a very, very simple function. You flip it up, it turns on. You flip it down, it turns off, unless you install it upside down. But that's basically the only thing you can do wrong is install it upside down. And so in my house, I have probably 35 of these things across the house. I walk to them, I flip them up, something turns on, I flip it down, it turns off. I want you to think for a second how many things are happening that I never have to think about behind the scenes for me to walk up to it and flip it on. How many people are employed by the power company to make sure the power is running to my house? How many people are employed not only to make sure it's running, but they're making sure the trees are cut back from the lines, or they're making sure that we have diesel fuel or whatever we're using to source my power? I have no idea what the source of my power is. Is it solar? Is it wind? Is it diesel? Is it a combination? Does it come from Canada? Does it come from Framingham? I have no idea where it comes from. All I know is I flip that and it works. And in our house, we don't have a backup generator built in. Because to me, I'm the guy that says, hey, in the last 10 years, I've lost power for maybe 3 or 4 days once. Am I going to go invest thousands of dollars in a backup infrastructure for this? No, because the problem isn't big enough. So that is a statement of confidence and faith in the fact that switch works 99.99% of the time. At the end of the day, I think if we start looking at the problem of data and our ability to use data, when do we get to a spot where we can build this relationship with the data we use that drives our business? The data we use to close the books, the data we use to build a budget or forecast, the data we use to tell us about our customers, our supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. Very few companies have this relationship where they know that the hardware, the cloud, whatever the storage is reliable, the compute is reliable, the calculations are reliable, the data is valid, it's a single version of truth. There's a lot of things that have to happen to give you a relationship like this with your data. And that fundamentally is kind of the starting point of saying, hey, if we can do this, turn on, off, let's get creative. Let's buy a Nest thermostat. Let's buy some fancy Google light switches that predict our movement. Let's start thinking ahead of the time. But frankly, I think there's a lot of this that needs to be done first, especially in the world of data in a corporate level, before we get to a place where we start automating everything. There's work to be done there. So again, this is my kind of a roundabout advertisement for who we are, Archetype. Our job at Archetype is to make sure that switch on your wall works. You can turn it on, you can turn it off. It just does what it's supposed to do. We're the ones making sure the data gets where it's supposed to be, that it's valid, it's protected from everybody, and it is fundamentally serving its purpose. Not by only measuring what happened yesterday and what happened the month before, but also helping you predict what might happen, what could happen, and helping to prescribe next steps around your business model. So which is why we're here and thrilled to share the stage today with two of our really important partners, Dataiku and Snowflake. So Archetype, at a quick glance, we have 4 practices. Analytic insights is probably the simplest one to describe. It's doing this kind of work. It's finding data and creating analytic insights and applications with the data. We have a performance management practice that focuses more on how data is used in the finance group. So we help our customers close the books, report internally and externally. We help them build a budget. We help them really run all of the processes that roll up to the office of CFO. Our cloud services group is really that infrastructure. Just so you think about the power company down the street and all the work the power company does to take care of power. We have a team of people that take care of our customers' data, their cloud environments, their onshore environments, their processes, their business rules, and data validation, et cetera, et cetera. And lastly, we have a digital advisory team that works with customers to kind of start thinking about where to start. So if you're thinking about the metaphor of the house, these 3 boxes, they build the house. The advisory team builds the blueprints. They sit with the customers, figure out, hey, what problem are you trying to solve? What's the use case? How do we return some immediate value to you from your data? And how do we then figure out the roadmap to get there in the long term? Building a robust blueprint. Who would buy a house without actually seeing the blueprint first? Who would build a house without seeing the blueprint first? I certainly would not. But that's how we organize. We've got a lot of successful customers. We're a fast-growing company, and we're thrilled to be here. So my next job is to basically hand off the baton to kind of introduce the panel here. And so without further ado, we're going to introduce our 4 panelists, starting with Marty Gopp. Marty, you can introduce yourself up front here.
Let me just turn myself on. Yeah, you're good. I live in San Antonio, moved years ago to for the Air Force. Ken, on to you.
So hi, I'm Ken. I work with Marty and his team building out our data science practice. I come from a long background in data science technologies. Actually spent quite a bit of time with Dataiku, one of our co-presenters today, and looking forward to sharing with you some of our thoughts around generative AI, where it's useful, where it's potentially not, where it's dangerous, and where the partners and Archetype can possibly help you put it into practice. It's always not the easiest thing to do. So. Who's up? Mo?
Mo Masood. I'm a principal architect at Snowflake. Been here for about 5 years now. Before that, I was at Teradata. Been in the data space for about 20 years, and just looking forward to listening into your use cases and how we can work with generative AI and tackle some use cases there.
And then, hey everyone, my name is Willie Ocaro, based out of New York City. I've been at Dataiku for about a year and a half now. Lately been playing around a lot with our LLM capabilities, as we'll try to show you today, and been working with some of our clients on the first couple of use cases that we feel are going to be relevant for the rest of our clients. So excited to share it with you today.
Great. So we're going to start off with a little bit more of a theoretical kind of discussion and introduction of what LLMs are, how they work, where you should use them, where you shouldn't, review some of the use cases that are out there. But I want to start off with hopefully justifying why you're here. Hit up some of the big companies out there and what they're saying about it. I think what you're going to see here is everybody thinks this is going to be a big deal. The trick is, how do you apply it? So Gartner uses words like transformative, revolutionary, gives you that competitive advantage. Accenture, it's going to help you automate, develop new things. If you don't embrace it, you're going to fall behind. McKinsey, it's transformative, invest in it, develop your strategy, improve. And then finally, Deloitte, it's going to be powerful. The potential is almost limitless. What it really boils down to is they're all over the place, everywhere.
So there are a lot of different companies here today. Just show of hands for those of you that have an official policy and are currently using one of the generative AI technologies. Okay. And who's using it sort of on the sly?
All right. We won't report you, don't worry.
Right.
So like I said, we'll talk a little bit about what it is. We'll review what it's good for, also tell you what it's not good for. Want to spend a little bit of time looking at some of the industry use cases. I'm hoping I cover everyone's industry. How you can employ it and how you should employ it. And then end with just a couple fun examples out there. And then I'm going to hand it off to our partners at Dataiku and Snowflake, and they're going to actually walk you through how their tools are employing it and doing it live. So, what is generative AI? Well, I think we should look at the words. Generative, what does generative mean? When you hear that word, what do you think?
Creation.
Anybody else? Creation? Making new stuff? That's what it's about. AI, of course, stands for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is quite basically just mimicking human behavior. So generative AI can create new content. How's that different from what you would call traditional AI? Well, traditional AI is really good at optimizing things, like finding patterns, making predictions, classifying data, recommending actions. It's not generating new things, it's looking for essentially patterns in your data that it can exploit. So where do you find generative AI? Well, obviously in text. We've all heard of ChatGPT. Google, not to be outdone, made their own. They call it Bard. Imagery. I'm sure you've heard of Midjourney. I was too cheap. I tried to find a free version of Midjourney and came up with this GenCraft if you're interested. They give you some free stuff. But it makes pictures. It's literally a digital sketch artist. You describe what you want drawn in words, and the more words you give it, the more accurate your art will be. I'll show you an example of this. It's pretty amazing. Code. Any coders out there? Have you used any of these tools to help you write code? It's pretty incredible what it's capable of doing. CodeStarter is one of them. You can actually use ChatGPT and Bard also for this, but CodeStarter is specialized in it. I have no musical talent. So if it weren't for generative AI, there's no way I'd be able to make music. MuseNet is an example of one out there. Making like soundtracks, background music, or even composing new pieces. And then finally, voice. It can actually imitate voice. When we talk about imagery, it's not just still imagery, it could also do video. You've all heard of deep fakes, I'm sure. That's where that comes from. So a little bit of history. Believe it or not, anyone have a guess of when the first chatbot was created? Throw out some years, come on. Stanford Research. Okay, that's not a year, but 1990, I heard. Okay? Anyone else?
1993 online.
Yeah, they're wrong. You asked the wrong question. All right, let me give you an image. Does this help you pinpoint the year? Or give you I'll even take the decade right now. And by the way, you're all way off.
70s.
All right, I heard 50s and 70s. One's too high, one's too low, so what is it? Yeah, 1966, actually. And it wasn't Stanford, other coast, MIT. A guy named Joseph Weisheim made this ELIZA chatbot. Now, you got to remember, this is 1966. Where were computers? They were the size of this room, okay? This chatbot was basically a rules-based chatbot that could answer very specific questions. But it was the first chatbot. Then we come up, what's this a picture of? Anyone know? Patrick, I know you know what this is. What is this? A neural network, exactly. Neural networks are pretty old. They've been around really, I think they started in the 50s, but they really came to prominence in the 80s and then again in the 2010s. And they came to prominence in the 2010s because compute power finally caught up where we could do some real work with neural networks. This is something called a GAN, Generative Adversarial Networks. And GANs allowed us to both create new things and then try to figure out what was created and what's real. So there's this generator and this discriminator idea, and they compete against each other. And this was pretty revolutionary for language models because now you could try new language and then something could see if it made sense. The transformer is another architecture. It's not the transformer, the robots that can transform into cars. It's a different kind of transformer. The transformer was another big thing that happened in comp sci that allowed language models to really take off. And then finally, ChatGPT. Does anyone know when ChatGPT was released? I need a month and a year for this one.
About a year ago.
Exactly a year ago. Yep, November 22 is when it was officially released. Most of us probably didn't hear about it till about February of this year, but it was actually released exactly a year ago. What ChatGPT did for large language models is really kind of simple. It made a really good interface that anyone, and I mean anyone, you got fifth graders. My wife's a literature teacher in elementary school. She's got kids using ChatGPT to write their essays. Okay, so you don't need a lot to be able to interact with it. All right, so why? Why now? Well, I think the biggest thing that happened recently, and by recently I mean in the last 10 years, is GPUs. GPUs have changed computers drastically. And ironically, it came from the gaming community. Jason mentioned, what was the game you mentioned? Call of Duty, yeah. GPUs on gaming PCs allow graphics to be rendered smoothly, more intricately. Well, all that's happening in the background is a lot of matrix math, linear algebra going on. Neural networks are linear algebra hogs. That's what they do, a lot of linear algebra. So NVIDIA discovered, hey, not just to the gamers, but also to the data science nerds, we can get two totally diverse. Ironically, a lot of times there's a lot of overlap between them, but data. You need a lot of data to train a language model. The advent of big data, I'd say mid-2000s, 2010s, also really helped us large language models off the ground. There's this thing called an attention network, or what you would call the model architecture here. I mentioned GANs before, but In 2017, Google released a paper called Attention is All You Need. And what it did is it allowed us to look at words with context from a lot further away from just the words near them. And it really revolutionized how languages worked. This notion of transfer learning, where I don't have to start over every time. I can start with a really good base and just improve upon it. Another big breakthrough in what happened. And then finally, it just took money, investing. Google invested, or has promised to invest billions over the next few years. Microsoft, I think, put $10 billion into OpenAI. Amazon's investing in it. I mean, it takes a lot of money because the hardware you need, the knowledge you need, just the time you need. So what is a large language model? Well, it's large because you've got billions of parameters and it's trained on trillions of pieces of data. Okay, let's think about that. Billions is a big number. Trillions is 1,000 times bigger. That's a lot of information that you need to gather to be able to train these things. It's a language model because that's how it interacts. That's its code. And language, it doesn't just have to be words. It could be chemical formulas. It could be protein sequences. It could be syntax, Java syntax. That's a language. So language model doesn't just mean the words we're talking. And then lastly, it's a model so it can predict. It makes some sort of predictions. And what was amazing about large language models is we started seeing this emergent behavior. We weren't training it to do this specific thing. It just happened. That's some of the mystery around it. So some of the core capabilities, it can follow reasoning. It has the natural language fluency. And then those trillions, I guess this isn't working, of pieces of data, that's a vast knowledge repository it has access to now that it can express through its language. All right, ChatGPT. By and far what most people know. Anyone know what the G, P, and T actually stand for? Okay, G, generative. P, anyone? Pre-trained. And the last one, it's that toy some of us older folks played with when we were kids. The robots in disguise. Transformer. Yeah, it's Transformer. Yep. So that's what GPT stands for. And actually, GPT is a model architecture that OpenAI created, I think around 2017, 2018 it came out. They're in version 4.0 now. The original didn't have a version. It was just called GPT, but they quickly added versions to it. So the first release of ChatGPT used 3.0. Now they're at 3.5. If you buy a membership, it's 4.0. I don't know when 4.5 is coming out or 5.0. Every successive one just has more stuff to it. ChatGPT had 175 billion pieces of information, parameters in it, and it cost over $4 million to train that guy.
Marty, 175 billion parameters.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to contrast that with like the typical models that we work with in data science on a more regular basis?
It's like comparing sand to, a beach. I mean, it's crazy. When we're in data science world, if we have thousands of variables, that's a lot. If we have tens of thousands, that's a crazy amount of variables. It's not unheard of to have models with a couple hundred variables or a couple dozen. So billions it's a lot of parameters. And each one of these needs to have a value put to them. So just think if you just randomly assigned a value to each one and it took you, I don't know, a nanosecond to do that, how much time it would take to do that. And then you have to do that over and over again. This is why these things cost so much to train. So not to be outdone, Bard came along and it said, I see your 175 and I raise you to 540 billion. So an even more complex model that was built. And as a result, it costs a lot more too, about 3 times as much. So what's the difference? Well, they have different underlying models. This is kind of nerdy, technical, probably you don't care. Their training data is important. ChatGPT is cut off as of September 2021. So if you went to ChatGPT and asked it about the Israel-Hamas war going on right now, which is very recent, it wouldn't know what you're talking about because it doesn't have information on it. That didn't exist when it was trained. Bard uses the internet for its information source, so it has access to more up-to-date information. The user interface is kind of biased here. One claims to be a little bit more user-friendly than the other. I'll be honest, I like Bard a little better, but they're both pretty decent interfaces. The big thing is Bard's better at questions and multiple responses, whereas ChatGPT makes it a little harder to do that. And then some of the strengths, Bard will sometimes give you resources, actual websites that you can go to for your sourcing data, whereas ChatGPT is really good at summarizing things. That's one of its strengths, just the way it was built. And then the biggest, like I already said with ChatGPT, is the data source is outdated. Now, each new version that comes up, they of course train it on more recent stuff, but it's always going to lag behind, especially if it's something very recent. Like, I think there's a lot of states with elections today. That's probably going to take a year before ChatGPT would be able to give you any answers on today's election results. So what's it good for? Brainstorming, recommendations, researching new topics, writing content, summarizing content, editing code, generating test questions. You need a travel agent. How about sentiment analysis? Finding data, especially if you're doing research in a new area and you need a data source. If you need help with your career, it can write your resume for you, write your cover letter, mock interview you, creates art. SEO, search engine optimization, big thing nowadays. If you got writer's block, it'll kick you off in the right direction. It can translate for you if you have customers in different regions of the world. So a lot of things, proofreading, a lot of things it does really well. What is it not good for? Well, come on. First and foremost, it lacks common sense. So you'll get responses that just don't make any sense. They may be factually correct, but they don't make sense the way you would read them. Understanding context. If you have long-form content, it tends to get repetitive. Multitasking, asking it to do multiple things. This is a big problem. It is only as good as the data it was trained on. If that data is biased, your results are going to show that bias because it's repeating it. The knowledge base we already talked about, it doesn't know current events. It may not have perfect precision. You may need to fine-tune your results, which we'll get into that in a little bit here. To do this and to train your own, massive compute required. Lots of computer resources. Accuracy. Just because it sounds right doesn't mean it is right. It can pass off something that sounds factual as not factual. This is one of the biggest things people don't like. It doesn't always or rarely sources its responses. So you don't know where these answers came from. You've got to do the follow-on work to find that. And it can totally make stuff up. This idea of a hallucination, of just because it sounds real doesn't mean it is real. Doesn't know how, just the facts. So it's not a panacea, absolutely. It's got its specific uses, but it's not good for everything.
For those of you that are looking to implement your own first LLM use case, what are you thinking of as far as potential uses? So maybe, like, if anybody who's willing to share a little on like a first thought about what you want to use it for. I think we were talking earlier about an example of an HR. How many days off do I have left the remainder of the year, right? So Q&A with a little bit of recall. Anything else?
Support case deflection.
Okay, maybe give me a little.
Yeah, so like a lot of stuff like time spent on support with people answering like maybe how much of first tier support cases in can you deflect through self-service by servicing answers through an LLM rather than the typical we're going to throw a search knowledge base at you and see if you can pick the right needle out of the haystack. So one version might be a support agent assist where you're surfacing to the person answering the case, and then maybe with increased accuracy and confidence you could do direct to the case requesters.
So I'm assuming for a while it's been pitched, at least thought of it, to have a tool like that, a facility like that as part of your normal offering. I assume you're seeing LLMs and generative AI and some of these tools as like a quicker to market / cheaper way of building that competence. And you're thinking about doing it in-house versus...
Well, we're always having to build and buy, and then there's sort of what scope of data, do you bring data to the LLM or do you bring the LLM to the data? What scope does it need to consume in order to be effective at its job? And this sort of concept of like, do you have multiple repositories where you might get different answers from LLM? So I think it's a fairly complex question. Does the vendor do it well? Does it have the scope of data it needs to do it well? Is there integration work that might be difficult to do into the application? There's a lot of questions around that, I think.
Cool. Anyone else want to?
HR was one, and similarly, one of the things we were trying to imagine is if we could do it for our own sort of internal demand management, right? Use our service catalog, kind of start building out off of that, right? We've already defined, our services and kind of who's running them, and try to anticipate what the inquiry may be, and to kind of give them that sort of self-service model back, right? So that we don't have to do that anymore. Eventually, when it lands with us, it's kind of already pre-baked about what they were intending and hopeful to do, right? But I think it goes beyond the nature of what we've already asked and answered ourselves, but we definitely see the service catalog as a framework of something where it might be able to help stem, our service offerings around demand that manually takes up a lot of time. But again, we weren't sure on that one, but 100% on the HR one, but we weren't sure if we could kind of imagine it through for demand management internally.
Well, Marty's, I'm sure, is going to provoke a few more ideas here in a second.
So some basic categories that I want you to think about that may help you identify your use cases. Data transformation. So this is what you would call your more traditional natural language processing tasks, like feature extraction, summarization, reformatting, classification, clustering. Things that have been around for a while, that LLMs just make better. But these tasks have been around. Enhanced search. I think, by and large, probably 90% of ChatGPT is used for a better search engine, a better Google. That's fine. So how about connecting it to your knowledge base? How about to your data? Chat your data, or chat your tool. And I think a lot of existing tools out there are putting this into their repository. I'm pretty sure Microsoft is releasing a new Office assistant, not the paperclip, something different, that is more interactive to help you. Content generation, this is where LLMs really start to shine. They are great at writing new stuff, adding or editing to what you have, or putting some structure to what you have. If any of you have used like Grammarly for writing papers, it's an LLM-based tool. It's been around for a while. Question and answering. Now we get into some of the more sophisticated things that LLMs can provide. Now you're combining search and summarization, because I want to go to my data set, I want to search for something, because that's the question, and then I want to give an answer that's not, here's a 300-page tech document. Give me a couple sentences about it. Workflow automation. This one was a new one to me. But if you think about it, if any of you have been involved in RPA or robotic process automation, think RPA and steroids. That's what it's capable of doing. And you automate business functions. How many of us have to submit expense reports or things like that? Wouldn't it be nice if instead of spending half an hour, you could do it in 3 minutes? That's the kind of stuff it can do. Now we're going to get into some of the more advanced areas. Co-pilots and digital assistants. So this is like an advanced chatbot or a cutting-edge coding assistant. For the coders out there, imagine you could just write in prose, I have a data set, I want it to give me this. That's not that far off. If any of you have to write SQL code to interact with a database, imagine not having to know all the syntax and you can just say, hey, I'm really looking for this result and compare it against these different fields. And then the last one area is this idea of autonomous agents, where now you've got a co-pilot that pilots itself. So it's going to figure out, based on your history of what you've done, what kind of questions you're going to want to ask. And this is where it gets a little bit into like the Buck Rogers future, I think, of, we're really going to be replacing humans with some beyond menial tasks, some pretty complex stuff. All right, let's get into some actual industries. So I've got about a dozen industries I'm going to go through. Hopefully I hit your industry somewhere in here. I tried to grab them all. So customer support, think about chatbots that provide personal services. They automate support. They do sentiment analysis on customer feedback. I think we all can think of that being used in our industry in some way or other. We all deal with some sort of customer support. In retail, imagine you don't have to write product descriptions. You could get ChatGPT to write it for you, or translate documents, or offer local online offerings if you're a global company. McDonald's in Germany offers different things than McDonald's here in the US. Finance. Fraud is a big problem in finance. Analyzing the news, summarizing the news, doing risk assessments, great area. Healthcare, truly personalized care. A doctor has to read your record. No, you could summarize it in a couple words or a couple sentences. This idea of designing new drugs is pretty spectacular. I mean, the next drug may not be built by humans. It'll be built by a computer. That's both intriguing and scary at the same time. IT, software development, writing code. I mean, has anyone used it as a code assistant or code helper? Yeah. Do you like it?
It's good at stuff with a byte base, but if you get it to obscure stuff, it sort of falls down.
Yeah.
Or I find in SQL, it's less good because it's sort of a personal expression of your business logic, so
Yeah.
it's not really trained on that. So, but I think if you're to say like write me a general thing in Python that's covered well, like it does fantastic at that.
Patrick, any experience?
Yeah, similar experience. I think if we could fine-tune the coder models to our own repository, that would hugely help.
Yep.
We're getting there.
Yeah. I think Mo might talk about that in a bit.
Law. I don't think there's any lawyers in the room, but if anyone's ever had a law class, I mean, lawyers read tons of stuff and they have to summarize massive amounts of information. Imagine what a large language model could do for you. Manufacturing can actually design new things. Hook a large language model up to a 3D printer and see what it can build you. Or teaching robots physical activities. Marketing, I'm sure a lot of us have used it to create content for a blog or something like that. Again, Don't just go to ChatGPT, have it write you a blog and publish it. Make sure somebody looks it over for you. But it does a lot of that targeted advertisement, or this idea of personalizing things. Multimedia. This is, I think, I'm not an artist, so I have a lot of appreciation for this. I can create incredible art from my words in a program. Compose music, closed captioning. I mean, that's a lot of the kids nowadays hardly listen to the audio, they read the closed captioning. I don't know, it's a phenomenon with, what is it, Generation Z. They do it. They always have closed captioning on. Professional services, think your digital assistants or a meeting transcriber. I'm sure you've all used that before. If you ever hit the transcribe button or record button in Teams, it's going to transcribe it for you. Social media, writing articles or blog posts, and then finally entertainment. Think, concept art or generating, the automatic storyboarding. So now I've given you kind of a dozen different industries. Let's actually look at some use cases. So customer support. JetBlue. They use chatbots to answer FAQs, resolve issues, and then they escalate it when necessary. So it's kind of like what you were saying, where it can triage and handle some of the lower level questions without having you to click or hit 20 different buttons on the phone. eBay does a bunch in the retail space with personal shopping assistants that find the product. So if you're searching for something and you missed the bid, this thing can suggest where you would go next. Finance, Morgan Stanley, big bank. They've got a chatbot that can answer questions about your account, provide you financial advice, and then help you with your trading decisions. All through a chatbot. Don't have to hire someone to do that. Healthcare, new drugs. They can help identify those candidates and then predict, based on your medical history, how well will that drug work for you? What are some potential side effects that you need to be aware of? I mean, this is literally life-saving stuff. Microsoft is doing a lot. They're developing features in Azure that will allow you to automatically deploy applications. I mean, if you're writing code and you have something that can help you deploy it, deployment is usually the biggest headache most people have. In the law, this company, Kira, does automated document review, extract that key information, and then generate the reports. So all that menial work that takes just time, the language model helps you out with. Siemens, a big multi-global manufacturing company, they use it to try out millions of different designs and then let people look at the engineers, evaluate them, and pick the best one. Presto is a marketing company. They actually generate personal marketing messages based on your demographics, your history, your browsing behavior. I mean, again, think of it like Amazon's recommendations, but not just from what you do on Amazon, from what you do all over the net. Adobe, Illustrator, and Photoshop, the stuff you can do with those programs nowadays is almost criminal. I mean, you can make a horrible picture look amazing. You can create a whole new image, vector graphic, with just the words you give Illustrator. H&R Block does all kinds of tax work, so automate the simple tax returns so they can free up their professional workforce to do the complicated stuff. Hootsuite is a social media company. They use AI to identify trends, opportunities for you to get more people onto your sites. And then this is my favorite. You all know who Lucasfilm is. Well, believe it or not, they use it to generate new content for scripts. There's some of the latest Star Wars, the shorts they have out there on Disney were created, the dialogue, the music, the conceptual art, through AI. It's a brave new world. So, now that you've seen all this, how can you use it? Well, like everything, there's an easy way, which is really just via conversational interface. That's what ChatGPT offered us. And then there's, I'm not going to say the hard way, but a less easy way. That doesn't work so well at scale. So if you want to interface with a language model, you're probably going to have to do it programmatically. It's where you're going to need to bring in your software guys, your data scientists. And they basically send a request to the program, and it responds back to you.
So those of you that are using LLMs today, I assume it's through a conversational interface like, yeah, I mean, it's sort of, you can use it for this approved application, not cooked into pieces of software that you generate yourself. Is that fair? Is anyone using it in the second way?
Oh, we use it.
You're actively? Okay. And what's your application?
Chatbot, chat with your data, that kind of.
Okay. And are you using it, Marty's going to get into this in a second. Are you augmenting the
Rack, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Marty, go for it.
I told you. All right. So OpenAI and Hugging Face are two of the more, I mean, you all know what OpenAI is. They're the ones who created ChatGPT. Hugging Face, if you haven't heard of them before, they're kind of a curator of language models. I've lost count. It's in the hundreds of thousands of different language models that they have access to. And so you can actually go to their site, download a language model, and use it locally. So there's 4 levels of use. The easiest is prompt engineering. That's literally out of the box. You go to ChatGPT, you give it a prompt, but there's some smart things you can do in that prompt that will get you significantly better answers. And it's very simple to adopt and essentially free. You may have heard Patrick use an expression, RAG. That stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And what you need to think about here is you're augmenting the information you give the prompt with some very specific context that you've got locally. And we'll go into this a little more in detail. You can fine-tune your model, where now you're going to tailor an existing model to your data set. RAG and fine-tuning are both very similar approaches with the similar goal in mind, but different ways of getting about it. And they have advantages and disadvantages each, and we'll go into that in a second here. And then finally, you can build your own. All I got to say to you is good luck. That is not for the faint at heart. Be prepared to spend a lot of money and a lot of time and get a lot of really, really smart people. Because look who's building these. These aren't, people out of their garage. This is like the top-notch people in the industry are building these things. All right, let's talk prompt engineering. What can you do? This slide is something everyone in this room can do after today. Be more descriptive with your prompt. The more information you provide the prompt, the better. Give it an example. If you want to know something about states and you want the response to be in a 2-letter state, say, hey, Kansas is like KS, New Jersey is like NJ. Give it a couple examples. Structure your text. Tell it, I want a recipe to bake a cookie. I want the ingredients, colon. I want the steps, colon. I want, the calories and health information, colon. You can use hypertext markup language, HTML. You can use just basic things like bold text. It's amazing how little you have to do to get a much nicer structured answer out of this. This chain of thought idea is I give it one answer, I come back, I ask it a follow-up and back and forth. So it's almost now you're conversing with the prompt, where it's not just a one-time shot. You're giving it more every time. Specify personas. This is what is driving teachers nuts because a kid types in, write me an essay about Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, and it writes a response clearly written for a college kid, not a 9th grader. Well, the kid realizes, write it as if I'm an average C student 9th grader. And it's going to put in mistakes, mispronunciation, all kinds of stuff that makes it more reasonable that it was actually written by that kid. If you wanted to, talk from a certain level of management or a certain level of expertise. Those are all things you can include. Flip the approach. Ask, this is kind of the Jeopardy answer, ask ChatGPT to ask you questions about a topic so that you can help narrow down what the right question is, and then ask ChatGPT. Again, as we're getting down here, these are more, it's not just a one time, it's a little bit of back and forth. And then finally, this whole reflect, review, and refine, I can't stress that enough. Don't just settle for the first answer. I know Bard will let you regenerate an answer if you don't like it. Sometimes it even gives you 2 options on how it's output. But you can ask it the same thing and just say, hey, based on that last answer, expand on this. Or I didn't understand that. Can you tell me more about this? Or, it's kind of like when you're having a conversation. You don't just ask it once. You start drilling down into it. Literally, all these things, walking out of here, you should be able to do. And it should drastically improve your responses. All right, retrieval augmented generation. This is kind of the new, I think this is where a lot of advancements are going to happen because it's got some slick properties that come at a pretty cheap price. So the architecture is I'm going to ask an interface some sort of a question. And it's going to go and it's going to retrieve specific information from my local repository of data. That could be my tech docs, it could be my marketing material, all the products I sell, and the product descriptions. But the point is, it's going to search my repository for the right things to bring back with it and augment the prompt that I send to an LLM, to ChatGPT, to Bard. I'm not getting rid of that. I'm just providing even better. This is like prompt engineering on steroids. But I'm prompt engineering at scale automatically from my local repository. And because of that, now it can generate a response using that augmented data. What is this really good for? If you have specific local information that frequently changes. So you've got tech docs that you're constantly updating, or product descriptions, and you keep releasing new products, and you keep updating them.
Internal company policies.
Yeah, internal company policies, HR policies, all that kind of stuff. This is where RAG really comes ahead. Patrick, do you mind sharing what you're using it for? Is that okay?
It could be used news as well.
Okay, news. Yep. So you're pointing it to a news feed or some sort of news database. Yep. Absolutely.
It depends on how good your retrieval is.
Yes. That's the research in this area is about efficient retrieval and retrieval of the right information, not too much, not too little. And honestly, that's not easy if you think about it. Because I can just retrieve my whole 3,000-page tech manual. Here's the answer. It's in there. Find it. Or I could return the one word that matches the word I sent it. Either one. One's too short, one's too long. All right, fine-tuning. Fine-tuning really is you take a pre-existing model and you update some of the parameters in it. Now, if you remember when we showed you a picture of a neural network, it has multiple layers. These things will have tens, hundreds of layers. You don't have to redo all the layers. You can just do some of them. And then the person queries it. So if you want to mimic the behavior, the style of your content, that's where fine-tuning comes in real handy. If you have a very specific way of answering things, if your tech docs are all written in Bostonian and you're talking to a guy from Texas, we don't talk like you folk up here. Okay? So you may want to fine-tune it for Texan proper English. That's where this comes in handy. Now the question is, how many parameters do you retrain? How many parameters are in these models? I'll just take an order of magnitude. Come on, somebody who is paying attention. Billions, right. So do I retrain all of them? Just a few? Or randomly pick a bunch? That's where the research is here, is figuring this out and doing this in a smart way. All right, last one. Build your own. You want to do it. I don't trust any of these yahoos from OpenAI or Microsoft. They don't know what the heck they're doing. I'm going to do it myself. All right. Well, 4 easy steps. Collect your data, get your architecture together, train it at scale, and then evaluate it. Easy peasy. That's no joke. The bulk of that expense is the compute hardware that you're going to need in order to do this in a timely manner. And by timely manner, I mean in a time frame where you can have a trained model before the world comes to an end. Billions of parameters trained over and trillions of pieces of data means lots of compute power. You can rent GPUs from Amazon, Azure, Google. It's still going to cost you a ton. If you want to buy them yourself, then you get to maintain them. Just the electricity alone to power these things, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is no joke, folks. I have a really hard time. I haven't talked to a lot of people about this, but I have yet to meet anyone who has justification for training their own. I think the closest, and I haven't talked to anyone in DoD, but if it's like on a classified, super top secret nuclear codes type data set where we can't have this go out anywhere and we need a large language model, I think they're screwed. They got to train their own. They're not going to want to put that into ChatGPT. But other than that, this is the extreme of the extremes. So let's compare them. So prompt engineering, what I want you to look at here is how much external knowledge you need and then how much adaptation is required. Prompt engineering allows you to play a little bit on both, but not a lot. It's limited. RAGs are really good if you have a lot of external data that changes pretty rapidly. The reason why you wouldn't want to fine-tune that is because fine-tuning is a big expense, and once you've done it, it's static. It's hard to update. If you want to update a fine-tune, you have to fine-tune the whole model again. If you have a RAG and one of your documents changes, you just have to change it and adjust its search parameters. I'm not saying it's trivial, but it's a lot easier than retuning the whole model. And then finally, of course, custom, you all know, that's for if you have really particular needs. Patrick, do you mind if I ask, do you fine-tune also?
Yeah, we do.
Do you do both, or do you do a one or the other, or?
So it's a combination of RAG and fine-tune.
Okay. And I know Patrick, so I'm picking on him a little bit because I know he'll answer me well, so thanks, Patrick. But that's the best approach. If you have, let's say you have that situation where stylistic things I want to take care of, but I know I've got other things that change frequently, fine-tune on a monthly, yearly, whatever cadence, but then use RAG to get the latest and greatest updates. You can use both. Again, even if you did RAG and fine-tuning together, it's going to be orders of magnitude cheaper than building your own. Anyone else do this level of work beyond just prompt engineering? Okay. That's okay. Don't worry. All right. How do you use it effectively? Well, some of the things, some pros and cons is it's definitely good for scalability, doing content generation at scale, and helping you with your search engine optimization. Some things to be careful of. Quality of the outputs could be bad. You've got to check them. Plagiarism, of course, is a huge problem. Blacklisting. There's actually sites out there now that are trying to find AI content and downgrade it or downlist you on search engines. So be careful of this. It can sound robotic and it can't generate new ideas. All it can do is combine things that are already out there. All right, what are some things to consider? Bias and discrimination is a big, big problem. The data is from the internet. And we all know that the internet is perfectly unbiased and 100% true. Glad you laughed. Thank you. Yeah, so you have to be careful of that. There's lots of misinformation and disinformation, and they're different. Misinformation is just wrong. Disinformation is trying to be wrong and knowing it. They're both out there. Hallucinations are this idea of just because it sounds right doesn't mean it is right. There's plenty of stuff that gets passed off as factual, and to you it may sound factual, but someone who knows what it's really about goes, no, this is total BS. You need someone to check it. You could have content. We already talked about the costs involved. It could be difficult to interpret the results because it's not presented in a way that makes sense to you. It could be very impersonal. I wouldn't use it to write a love letter to your wife on your 25th anniversary. Not that I did that, but anyway, we won't go there. Privacy and security. If you put it on ChatGPT, it's out there. You've all heard of stories of companies putting their financial statement, an accountant goes, hey, help me analyze our financial statement. Guess what? It's out there in public now. There are companies, my old employer, USAA, has shut down ChatGPT, blacklisted it. You cannot access it from company websites. I'm sure there's some of you all work at companies that have done stuff like that. And it's because of this, the privacy and security concerns. And those are legitimate. You want to use the right tools. Sometimes BARD is better, sometimes ChatGPT is better. If you want to do code, you probably want to go with one of these code-specific tools because they'll be better at it. They're made for it. And then this is something where actually the recent writer's strike, this is one of the things they were complaining about is, hey, you're taking all my stuff as source material and you're generating content off of it. Steve Altman is going to come into some legal trouble with this too. People are going to start suing him, especially when he monetizes. He claims he doesn't take a salary now. The boy's making money somehow, guaranteed. And they're going to come after it. And this is one of the areas because he copied everything off the internet. Did he ask for permission? Just because it's out there doesn't mean you're allowed to do that. And again, if you got a kid who wants to be a lawyer, get into copyright because this is going to be where the future's at. So we talked about a lot of these already. Misinformation, bias, copyright infringement, privacy and security, job displacement. People are worried legitimately this is going to replace their job. That's something we have to be careful of. Some moral and ethical failures. In 2020, there was a deep fake of Zuckerberg that went around and completely false. I think he was promising something about his company or some financial thing. Totally wrong, totally false. Google created a chatbot in 2021. I'd be surprised if any of you saw it because it was out there so quick it got pulled. It was generating, I'm not kidding, racist and sexist responses to people. Google shut that thing down in a hurry. Where did it learn? On the internet. Maybe they shouldn't have used Tinder to train it. I don't know. And then this one, did anyone see this? Do you remember this one? Zelensky surrendered to Putin in 2022. Did you all know that? Deep fake, yeah. There's been deep fakes of Trump talking about how much he loved Obama, Obama about how much he loved Trump. Those are obvious. This one had a lot of people going for a while because that's not our area. All right. When you use LLMs, you have to be upfront about it. A disclaimer or something. Hey, we used an LLM to create this piece of art, this content, whatever. You got to have human oversight. That can't go without saying. Watch for the bias. It's going to be hard to find it sometimes because you may not realize it's a biased output. There's tools out there that can help you cross-check your information. Not just human experts, but actually, automated experts. And then finally, use the right tool. These are not foolproof, okay? But these are just some red flags that if you get a piece of content, might help you. If there's typos or slang, ChatGPT tends to not do it unless you tell it to in a prompt. Tends to overuse the word the. It's just a weird thing in a language. And if you think about it, because the is in a lot of language of our language. This is a big problem. Factual material without a source. How do you know it's true or not? It tends to be shorter sentences. Again, I'm not very good in English, so I'd have a hard time finding this, what's short, what's not. Common words are buzzwords. It definitely uses buzzwords because that's what shows up in its training data. And then If it's just facts and not a lot of insight and analysis, that's another area where you might go. This is happening. So what does the future hold? Definitely enhanced content creation. The stuff is getting more creative, more hard to pass off. Is it a human? Is it a machine? This idea of hyper-personalization. You go to look at a book, and the description isn't what the author wrote, it's what an LLM wrote, because it knows the kind of books you've read in the past. I mean, this idea of hyper-personalization is where it's really going to come into us in the retail space. Languages are going to become a thing of the past because it's going to be so easy to translate between them and interact and do it in real time. For the non-creative, like me, I'll be able to generate art. I won't have to hire someone to put background music on my video or on my website when you go to it. I can just do it in a LLM. And then there's going to be new industries that come out of this. What are they? I'm not a fortune teller good enough to know this. But one area that you may have seen is advertisements for something called a prompt engineer. Has anyone seen those? Literally a job to prompt ChatGPT. I wish it were false, but they're out there. There's prompt engineers out there. And then, of course, government regulation. Steve Altman, as soon as ChatGPT was released, goes in front of Congress and says, you know what? We need to regulate this. Do you really think that's what he wanted to do? Or did he want to stop the competition? Look at the date on that thing. It may be too small. Can anyone read the date? Yeah, that was a week ago. An executive order from Biden on AI. They're worried about this. All right. Automate your everyday task, augment your abilities, free up your human capital from the just boring stuff. But beware. Keep a human in the loop, watch for the bias, use it for what it's meant for, not for what it's not meant for. All right, a couple of fun examples. And I did very simple things here. So I asked ChatGPT, tell me about yourself. What are you? That is the exact prompt I put in. And then here's the response it gave me. Notice I didn't tell how to format it or anything, and it just gave it to me this way in a numbered list. What it can do, what it can't do, and then how it can add value. Pretty good. I went to Bard and basically asked it the same thing. Honestly, I like the way this looks a little better. That's me. This is purely aesthetic. I think content-wise, this one's a little shorter. It's not as repetitive. And I will admit, I use Bard more now than I do ChatGPT. I just like it better. I suck at art. Stick figures is about the extent of my artistic ability. But a couple weeks ago, I did some photography of the Milky Way. Has anyone ever tried to take pictures of the Milky Way? It's not easy. You got to go to a really dark area. You got to have the right equipment. You got to have patience and all that. It's not fun. So I said, you know what? Screw this. I'm just going to have something generated for me. This is the exact prompt I gave it. This is what, 25, 30 words? This is my third prompt. I did 2 before this that were a little shorter, didn't give me exactly what I wanted. Third time was a charm. That's what it created. I'd pass that off as my own photography, except it looks a little too fake. It doesn't look like a picture. It's more like a painting. I'd put that on my wall. And that's from that short of a description. There's some amazing art that's coming out there. There's also some really nefarious stuff where people are saying, hey, take the picture of my girlfriend and do, well, you can imagine what people are doing with it. It's horrible. There was a case just recently of that happening to a high school girl. So to every good thing, there's bad thing. That's my portion of it. hopefully that's given you an introduction to what it is, how you can use it, what you can do with it. Now we're actually going to get to the cool stuff and see how you do it for real. So,
And
Waleed?
while they're transitioning here, I think one of the things that's really different about
Do you want me to move that?
what's happening in this space is they're both technology and data science, and both of them are making it relatively easy to deploy very specific LLMs to your organization without a tremendous amount of new investment either in people or in technology. I'd say to put a chatbot on your website that was specific to your company prior to these LLMs would cost an amazing amount in people and technology. And now I'd say, I think it's fair to say that that can be done pretty fast. So it's, I think, a good case for building using some of these RAG or fine-tuning examples more than buying, if that makes any sense. All right, did I stall enough for you guys?
I can stall for a few more minutes.
A few more seconds.
Mitchell, can you help us get it projected?
Yeah.
Is it?
I forgot what the. Is it? I want to. Yeah. I just extended window over there. Oh, got it. Perfect. I can drive from here. No problem. Oh, there you go.
Mo, do you want the clicker or?
No, I can just use this.
Okay.
This is fine. So thanks for coming out, guys. I've been at Snowflake for 5 years, and I've seen tons of work being done in the space, especially around Snowflake acquiring companies 3-4 years ago that are now being baked into the product itself. We acquired Mist AI about 3.5 years ago. As a result of that, you're seeing SQL functions like forecasting or anomaly detection show up very easily just by using SQL or Python or whatever you're comfortable with. And then most recently, we acquired Neeva, which was a search competitor for Google, and also ApplicatDB that's coming out into the product as Document AI as well. Marty mentioned the history of where we are. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but we're seeing exponential growth in not only data, but the number of models that are being propagated out and then that are being used and utilized. And when we look at the traditional machine learning techniques here, we see that it's usually around your structured data, you're trying to predict something, or looking at NLP problems or forecasting. Those are all well and good within your structured data itself. But when we look at the data that's available in your organization, there's tons of studies done that more than 80% of your data is actually unstructured, whether it's PDF, images, XML documents, whatever it may be. How do you extract that value and then bring it into your organization and then being able to work for you, right? So being able to leverage all the different use cases, that's where we're seeing the growth of Gen AI. And all sorts of different use cases are coming up from the capabilities that are from the generative AI standpoint. When we look at our partner ecosystem, Dataiku, Archetype, we're helping customers deploy applications very securely, right? The biggest thing is, why don't you want your data, your PII data, to be trained on OpenAI, right? We looked at that problem, and how we deploy it gives you that ability to keep all your data secure without leaving their Snowflake boundary. Who's a Snowflake customer at you guys here? Awesome. Are you guys using the container services, or have you?
Turn it on my account.
Will do. We'll work through it.
Will, if you turn it on, I'll use it today.
Awesome. We'll talk later. When we look at this diagram here, right? What we're looking at is giving you the ability to use LLM in seconds, or being able to build and deploy. I'll show a quick example of downloading Llama from Hugging Face and then deploy that. So the flexibility stays there. Most important is keeping your data and models secure, right? That is native to what we do. With the ability of Dataiku, having that push down capability, all that feature capability stays within Snowflake itself. So when taking a step back, right, you already have all your data in Snowflake itself, your governed data and all your models, right? If you don't, you need to move over. Most recently, we just announced Cortex. So what is Cortex? It's a set of functionality and a framework that's going to give you the ability to run serverless LLM functions. It's going to give you the ability to have a vector search built in as well. So for your RAG architecture, you can use that. And then if you want to fine tune it as well, you can also always fine tune your model here as well, right? In my example, I'll bring that open source model in, fine tune it, and then, or bringing other pre-trained models like Reka, Anthropic, and others that can run natively next to your data as well. So Cortex gives you the ability to not only do that. I mentioned our acquisition for Neva. This is where the search context comes in, where you can then search, how do I join these two tables? Having that flexibility built into your systems is going to give you that productivity boost, right? And then as part of, I had mentioned, we acquired ApplicaDB. That's Document AI here. So this is going to give you the ability to now ask questions to any unstructured data. If you have PDFs and you're looking at financials, for example, you can ask what were the total ARR for 2022. We'll look at that behind the scenes. We'll instantiate a GPU serverless cluster, and then being able to look at and run that LLM model that we've published, and then being able to get those questions in a chatbot manner, right? This will give you the flexibility, not only PDFs, but you name it, any images, and so on and so forth. Universal search is where, again, you can start asking questions on your specific data that stays within Snowflake, and also giving you the flexibility to then apply. Now, if you wanted to create a RAG architecture and then have a certain set of rules that you define, instead of creating a model, what we're seeing out in the field is there's going to be smaller foundational models that are business specific that you apply to each of your applications. And then they're going to perform better than having, for example, Falcon with 140 billion parameters, because it's harder to fine tune that model all over again, right? Not harder, but it's more expensive. You're going to have to spend that compute power to actually train it with your business requirements and your business processes there. And then the Snowflake Copilot here, this is where you can, we'll have a Copilot show up right on your Snowsight environment, where you can say, write me a query to give the last year's ARR or whatever it may be. We'll generate the SQL for you. We know we run billion queries a day. We've got bad queries and we've got good queries as well that we're learning from, and we know our compiler well. So I think that is where it's going to be a lot more effective for you to do that type of work. And then I had mentioned we acquired Streamlit about 3 years ago. That's going to give you that Python SDK framework to be able to deploy applications very easily. With 20 lines of code, you can build an application, deploy it, disseminate it in your organization, and that's what we're seeing from a front-end perspective there. Any questions there? And we also have integration with Bedrock and OpenAI as well. The main thing here is that your secure data stays within the boundaries of Snowflake. It's not leaving out for other models to train it with your sensitive information. That's what we're trying to solve for over there. So when we look at all your data, we are giving, with our partnership with NVIDIA, we have acquired large number of GPUs that you will have the same concept of having that CPU compute available, where you can scale up, scale down. The same principles apply on a GPU as well. And then giving that flexibility to choose different models, and then having us scale back if the type of work that's required might run on 2 nodes, A100, or 4 nodes. We'll scale that automatically behind the scenes for you. You define how far you want to scale up to, and then we work within those parameters as well. Again, partners like Archetype are working, and Dataiku is giving you that low-code to no-code flexibility and building these pipelines and deploying them in production. The biggest thing is actually deploying it in production, right? That simplifies when you have the right partners and the right ecosystem to actually go there and build on your use cases as well. So in our Snow Day, we announced tons of stuff. You're going to see on the top left here, top right there, we're about to go GA soon with our modeling API. That's going to give you the ability to, we're already in public preview, so if you're a Snowflake customer, you can start using the Snowpark APIs. But behind the scenes, what we're doing is we're parallelizing that workload. If you're using pre-processing techniques like 1HE or one-hot encoding or anything else, that gets pushed down to at the CPU level, and then that's where you get the MPP platform to parallelize that workload and deploy it at scale. So how do you train it on trillions of records? Right, that's how you scale. If you want 1,000 nodes, you can go from 1 to 1,000, scale back down. That's the flexibility you get with Snowflake there. And then that gets whatever IDE of choice you're using, VS Code or PyCharm, could be any of your IDEs that you're using. Behind the scenes, we're pushing it down as a data frame API that gets translated into SQL. That's running behind the scenes for you. You're just operating in your normal data science manner, and then we push those even libraries down that can then be propagated and run natively next to the data itself, versus pulling the data out, right? And having that ability to get to, once you deploy that model, you also have the flexibility to then look at the operational side of things, where we've launched our model registry. So we still integrate with Dataiku, MLflow, and other partners as well. Once that's there, that's going to expose off your operational, so your LLM ops, and from an operational standpoint, you can deploy which model's working. Depending on the accuracy scores that you're getting, you can push another model systematically as well. So once it gets deployed, you have that end-to-end pipeline of looking at how your models are performing, and you can deploy them on regular CPU or the container services, which is where you can run CPU or GPU nodes as well. From a feature stores perspective, this is currently private preview. To give you a little overview on our release cycles, we're releasing new features every week. And behind the scenes, we're running 3 versions of the software, so it's seamless for the customers. Whenever we're pushing out new features, it doesn't impact our customers. We can always roll back to 1 or 2, depending on how the release is going. But this gives you the feature ability to, once it's in AWS, it's in private preview. When we go to Azure, it's in public preview, and then we go GA once it's available in GCP as well. So that's our rollout cycle there. From a feature store perspective, again, whether you're streaming data in or you're operating in batch mode, once you have that raw data set, you can then apply the tag-based policies to then go from transformed to your curated layers, and then have that lineage of how your features are performing, what you've added. If there was new elements or columns added to your feed that are coming in, we can infer the schema on that and then extract new features coming in a systematic manner versus somebody doing that on a manual basis. And then the data is all available. So you can then act on being able to discover it and then monitor how those are functioning and then disseminate that information from that perspective there. And then from a training standpoint, again, we integrate with AWS Bedrock, Azure OpenAI as well. So you have the capability to externally talk to external clients as well. We just launched our notebooks as well. So this is giving an ability to, for the data science persona to have their notebooks natively within Snowflake. And then just giving you another avenue of being able to use and keep that data in place in Snowflake, and then having that your IDE choice or whatever your organization is using, you can still use a notebook feature there as well. Any questions? Yes.
Do you know when container services is going to be in public preview?
We're targeting December, mid-December, but things might change. We'll give you enough leeway once it's available. Are you guys in AWS or Azure or?
AWS.
Yep. So our first rollout is going to be AWS for public preview. We're looking at a December timeframe. Any other questions? So I'll dig into a little deeper on what Cortex is, right? This is giving you that flexibility, that having that architecture to not only create your own LLMs, but bring in others. I'll bring in Llama in this case, example, or having all these different small foundational models that you have within your system, and then being able to, one example was translation, right? With one single line of code, you can translate from German to English. Could be any of your customers' service records that you want to translate. All of that becomes very easy with a single line of code. And then behind the scenes, we're instantiating these serverless GPU clusters for you to be able to run those large language models. And then embed right here, that is where now if you wanted to create a RAG architecture, you can start embedding vectors based on how you would want to return those answers, right? Based on your data, you are using your internal data that's available, and then create the architecture to have that available. And what we're seeing is you're going to have thousands of these foundational models running, or LLMs running, right? You could be using Llama, you could be using BART. Again, use the right tool for the right job, or the right model for the right job. And we're giving you that platform to be able to use that for ability. I'll get into Document AI and Snowflake Copilot as well. But some of these specialized functions, right, where you can then operate on unstructured data. So if you wanted to translate it, if you wanted to extract an answer from certain text, if you wanted to get sentiment analysis on that text, that is going to give you the ability to run on that unstructured data. Currently in private preview. And then the ML-based models are already GA, so that can be used in production. There's tons of new LLMs and functions that are, as part of those acquisitions that I had talked about earlier, we're bringing those all into the single platform and then exposing it off for you to use that. Right. And then there's, again, those generalized functions as well, where now you can start asking, for example, your Copilot, how do I join these two tables? Or anything that you would want to create a query for, you can ask that in natural language, and then we'll give you the query based on that. And then being able to run, in this example, we're calling Llama 2, could be anything, right? You can then deploy that and have that run with a simple data frame operation, calling this complete function and building that chat interface. So we're abstracting the level of detail that's needed to actually deploy these models in production. And from a vector search standpoint, you can embed that text. You can have a table that is part of your text that is trained on this model. You can get the distance between those vectors, on the cosine similarity, on which words are assimilated together, and then having that ability to deploy that on your data, right? The biggest thing is that your data is different than everyone else's, right? How do you train that? Once it's in Snowflake, you now have the ability to create that RAG architecture or even fine tune it. It's up to you, however you would want to do it. And as you can see, some folks are doing both because you have to do both to get the right answer. And as part of that, we have Document AI, Copilot, and Universal Search. I'll quickly get into that as well. On the slide here, you see basically an invoice here. And as a business user, you're coming in, you're asking, what's the employee name? Behind the scene, we're classifying this and also extracting elements, right? You can see who signed it, who's the signatory authority. It could be an agreement, right? For lawyers, you can parse through that as well. And we're also giving out a score here as well, right? So we're giving out a score on what we think is right. So based on automation, if it's, let's say our confidence score is 50% or 60%, you can say, hey, somebody needs to look at this, right? You can build that workflow once it's deployed in production. And once the business user has asked the questions that it needs for that specific workflow that you're working for, what you can do is publish this model, or you can train it as well. So you can start training it based on saying, hey, this answer is actually not the employee name, it's a customer name. You can switch that and then start, once you publish that model, that's the model that gets published locally within your Snowflake instance. It's not training on external data sets, it's training on your data sets. Your data does not leave the Snowflake boundary. And that's the secure platform that you get, right? Once this is in production, your data engineers can take that pipeline, and behind the scenes, it's just running a SQL query that's giving you the flexibility to run that very easily. Any use cases around image scanning or that you guys are working on? But I know for search, as I mentioned earlier, this was a part of Neeva acquisition, where now you can start searching sales opportunities with stage and probability, right? So it'll give you the table. It'll also scan our marketplace to give you relevant information on how you might be able to solve for that. There's, external outreach data. There's thousands of listings on our marketplace that gives you that ability to bring in data without actually having to create that pipeline. Behind the scenes, it's a data sharing. Once that data is committed from a provider standpoint, it's live and available for consumers to consume off of. So there's no FTPing data or creating an EDI solution or creating an API off of it. You as a consumer or a provider, if you're providing data or applications, you have that ability to, without even moving the data itself, it's just a live share. So if a provider updates data every 5 minutes, it's available in Snowflake as a consumer every 5 minutes. So all of that work that needs to go into building those pipelines goes away as well. So we're seeing a lot of different industries sharing data with each other. DDCC being one of them, the clearinghouse, right? They're doing tons of work around how they disseminate that information to all the financial institutions, and that's making it very easier for them to do so. Copilot, again, asking in natural language, show me this for each of the month of 2022, right? We'll generate that query for you. You can add it to your worksheet or first run it, see if the values look right, and then put it in production. So making it easier for you to start using SQL there as well. I had mentioned Snowpark Container Services. This is where now you can run natively. We support SQL, obviously. We announced Python, Java, and Scala support as well. So if you have jobs that are written in R or C#, or even if you have applications that are on Vue or React that are not native to SQL. You can run that on a container service. You push that into OCI compliant Docker image. And then we're basically managing the Kubernetes cluster for you behind the scenes. And this is where our integration with NVIDIA comes into play. We have tons of, you can choose from different types of GPU nodes or standard nodes. So you can then define if you want to run an application on a CPU or a GPU. Again, gives you that flexibility of training it or even building your own if you have the capabilities to do so. Biggest thing is security, right? For us, we've built in security from the ground up. This wasn't an afterthought. And any time you store data in Snowflake, it's encrypted 4 times. It's encrypted at rest and in motion as well. But you have those governance policies that can define what the user can and cannot do with your data. So if I'm a customer service rep and I can only see the last 4 of the social, only that can be exposed off, but the underlying data does not change. So and the same principles apply if you're using an LLM and you're calling externally, you don't want your PII information to go out, you can tag your PII information and ensure at runtime you're not able to do that. So we're giving you that framework to be able to have that private, secure infrastructure and then have that access of that right data at that right time. These are some of our container services partners. Willie's going to demo a few things as well from a Dataiku standpoint. There's tons of work being done on our partner that's exposing off all different types of applications or even data itself within our partner network. So I'll quickly demo this as well. So this is our Snowsite UI, and I'll show you how easy it is to actually deploy something in Snowflake from a container service standpoint. I'm creating a security integration called Snow Services. So this is where you're authorizing that container service to go back and forth with your Snowflake data itself. Once that's created, there's separation of duties. So you would have a different role that does not have the ability to make sure you can change those principles, right? So those type of principles are baked into it. I'm using, again, I set my context here. I'm using LLM.data. And I'm creating a stage where I'm going to deploy the models. So for time purpose, it takes quite a while to download and run this, but I've already put a Llama 7 billion parameter tuned model already on a stage itself. So stage is nothing but an integration between an S3 bucket or Azure Blob or a GCS store. That's where we're accessing the open source model from. And I've also created a specs, and that's where I'm going to deploy those YAML files that get tied back to how you define that application that's running. And I have an image repository here. Within this image repository, you'll have a unique repository URL where you're going to be pushing your images to, your Docker images to. And in this instance, I'm creating a compute pool. Behind the scenes, it's running a A10 node. The same principles apply, right? Min and max nodes. If your job needs 1 node, we'll run on that. If it needs 2 or 3, we'll scale up and scale back down behind the scenes for you. Giving the instance family, and then the same principles apply on auto resume and auto suspend. So if you're not using it, in this example, after an hour, it'll automatically shut down. So you keep those costs in control. And if a new query comes in, we'll automatically resume that cluster and give you that horsepower to run that, right? So in this example here, I have a GPU 3 running, instance family. You can have as many as you want, as long as once they're up and running, we charge you by the second, and that's how you get billed. And I've created this service called Streamlit with the Streamlit YAML file. And what that does is it basically, in the application itself is I'm running a Flask API to run that fast chat API behind the scenes for Llama. And then the front end is Streamlit. And that is being exposed to a public endpoint. So if I go in and copy this from here, So this is again could be single sign-on or however you're signing on. That's that integration that I had created. Well, once I've created this Streamlit app is running on top of Llama, and again, it just becomes a chat application. In this example, I'll look at some call transcripts, and these are transcripts from customer service call records for an airline corporation, right? And instead of going through these that are stored within Snowflake, I can pick any of the calls that were happening, and I can extract information from it very easily. So behind the scenes, it's running natively on that container service and giving you that example of what happened on that flight and what the resolution was. So you can automate some of your processes very easily by putting this on top of your pipelines as well, right? So I've created this function, LLM, that's what's being called, and behind the scenes, Llama gets instantiated on this endpoint chat. And I can run this as part of my SQL, Python, whatever you're using. In this example, I'm saying, given the following transcript, give me the root cause, call summary, resolution, and the ending customer sentiment. Within one line of code, now you have the answer to not only the transcript, but what the voucher was. Let me expand this up a little bit. What the voucher for a future flight was instantiated. So you can automate a lot of these processes very easily and securely. I think that's the number one concern is how do you do that? How do you audit it, right? Any query that's being run has a unique query identifier that you can always go back to, right? And I'll open up to any questions or wait till Waleed goes over and then we can answer any more questions that you may have. Yes?
So I can't imagine we'll talk about RAG in the next talk. I was hoping, you talked a little bit about RAG architecture. Do you have a slide deck on that? And I'll tell you the context, right? We'll go a few years back when we talked about knowledge retrieval, it was a function of knowledge representation. What is the workflow that you're actually talking about? And you mentioned more than one time RAG architecture. What is that pipeline? What does that look like?
That pipeline, it could be, you could be writing in Python or SQL, right? That once that data comes in, you could be streaming new data that's coming in, and then based off of that, you can call that embed function, for example. Hey, here's the new data. I need to update my vector database to have more relevant searches, right? So as part of that.
Is it taking in, are you regarding that it takes in a curated model, or is it taking in a knowledge base? What is it taking in to start before you start refining?
Great question. So before we have from all these acquisitions, we have hundreds of different LLMs that are running behind the scenes, right? So that starting point for, I'll pick Document AI, for example, right? That's a serverless feature that's running. That model that was brought in is basically your starting point. You want to use Llama or OpenAI, you can bring it all in, right? I think that is the flexibility you have to start off from whatever starting point you want, or use one of our embedded functions that can do that behind the scenes for you. So you have the flexibility of choosing wherever you want to pick your journey off from. Did that answer your question?
Actually, so our next presenter, so we're almost in time, and we can certainly pick this up in a bit, but our next presenter from Dataiku actually may shed some light on differing architectures, because that's exactly what Waleed's about to talk about. More stalling, or should I jump in? Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right. Can you guys over there see the screen? I'm going to demo a bit of Dataiku, so feel free to migrate over to this side if you want to. Otherwise, you're good there. But hey, my name is Waleed Alcara. I've been at Dataiku for about 1.5 years as a sales engineer. Work with a variety of different customers across different regions and different verticals. So happy to talk about what all of them or what some of them are doing with LLMs today in the product, we'll make sure to show you some RAG examples as well. So can I get a raise of hands here or show of hands if anyone does know what Dataiku is, or if we even have Dataiku users in the room? Yeah, users? Awesome. So Dataiku is an end-to-end advanced analytics platform. We do everything from ingest the data, help you explore the data, to then do the data preparation that's involved pre-modeling steps. From there, you go into modeling, and then from the modeling steps, we allow you and help you to deploy machine learning models, monitor them in production, and then create this consumption layer on top of these. So whether that's an AI application or AI-powered application on top of that, or some nice dashboards to surface insights from those ML models, Dataiku is going to help you. And then we also let you work with a full code-based approach as well as a no-low code-based approach as well. And then anywhere in the middle, if you want to have a hybrid approach, that is also completely doable in the platform. So you see here we have a different variety of data experts, data analysts, machine learning engineers, business users. It's kind of an all-encompassing platform in that sense. So I'll skip over this because I know you're probably slided out at this point and you want to see some good demos here. So I'm going to talk about the 4 levels that Marty actually referred to in a very similar way. So I like that everyone is thinking about this in the same approach. And this is the 4 different levels that we're looking at around LLMs and Dataiku. And we're calling this concept in Dataiku the LLM mesh. Level 1 is going to be using a pre-built LLM and then something like a chatbot interface. So a pre-built application that is surfacing these LLMs under the hood, where you're going to have a less technical user, even a business user in this case, be able to interact with this bot, whether or not it's been enriched with your corpus of documents, whether it's been fine-tuned, or if it's just some version of ChatGPT, but at least it's a localized model that you're going to feel comfortable running internally or in your firewalls. That's going to be the lower end here of the business users. As we move further, we're also looking at more and more technical users along this line here. So next thing you have is prompt engineering. Dataiku has a prompt engineering interface that allows you to iterate over these different prompts. How do I build the best prompt to get the best result out of any LLM? Again, you're going to see this theme here where any LLM Dataiku is going to connect to. We're going to talk about what that looks like if it's in a Snowpark container service, for example. The next step over is adding your own knowledge. So that's where RAG comes in. You have a corpus of documents. You want to enrich that query before it hits the LLM. That's where Dataiku is going to help you with that RAG infrastructure. And then further in sort of the advanced techniques here where we want to help you also fine tune. So we're also going to look at an example of that where you're submitting the same use case, the call center transcripts. We're going to look at it from Dataiku, but then we're also going to add that iteration, so that human in the loop that's going to be sort of scoring or approving, giving feedback to the model so that we can fine tune it and create some sort of repeatable process to fine tune that model over time. So that's going to be the LLM mesh. Let's dive into a little bit of what's behind those blocks here. There's a few things happening. And like I said, we're going to span from no and low code all the way to a full code-based approach. The idea under the LLM mesh is in order to power LLMs across the enterprise, there's a lot of different blocks. We start with routing and orchestration. Which LLM are we going to use? We have cost reporting. This can blow out of proportions really, really quickly if you don't create any guidelines. Security and permissions. What data sources can I submit to an LLM? Maybe, again, we talked about the example of financial documents. Those need to be off limits to an LLM. Maybe something like a custom review database. That's probably fine. That lives online already anyway. Caching. Someone's hitting the same query over and over again. Why keep running that query? How about we just cache that and make that accessible to any user downstream? PII detection and content moderation. There's crazy things that could come back from an LLM that we want to protect against, especially if we're using that for external use cases where the outputs of an LLM might make their way into external users' screens. And then PII detection as well. So trying to, under the hood, make sure that if you are submitting a query into the LLM, that we're adding some sort of moderation to inhibit users from submitting the wrong information. An audit trail, so keeping a log of everything that's going through for both performance monitoring, but also for auditability. And then retrieval augmentation, so that's where the RAG infrastructure is going to come through. And then finally, there are lots of partners and lots of open source initiatives here that Dataiku is going to leverage. So from a computing perspective, we're working with NVIDIA. From a hosted LLM API services, we're going to work with Snowflake and the likes. If you want to bring in a self-hosted LLM instead of using something that's in a Snowpark container, then we're going to be able to use Hugging Face, for example. And then lastly, you have vector stores that we can work with. So if you are using something like Pinecone today, that's going to be yet another connection you can add to Dataiku. So the idea behind all of this is decoupling the application and the AI service layers, right? Dataiku in general, before LLMs kind of sort of caught on to this buzz today, Dataiku has always been decoupling the data layer from the actual logic layer. So no matter where your data is, Dataiku can meet you there. And it's very similar with this process as well. So we're going to connect to whichever LLM you'd like to leverage. What you see over here is a series of different out-of-the-box connectors that we can set up to that LLM. So managing your API keys for you, adding any limits to the number of tokens that you want to allow your users to leverage. All of those little things that are additional pieces you might have to configure yourself, Dataiku is going to help you configure and store in the backend. The next thing we have is a secure gateway. So adding this layer of permissions. So this is a quick example here of who's allowed to use a select number of LLMs, limiting the number of tokens, adding some additional controls over here, which groups have access to these details. Maybe I want to give you access to this OpenAI key in Dataiku, but I don't want you to see it. It's never going to be available to you unless you use it through Dataiku with the checks and balances we have implemented around the organization. Control and optimizing these costs. So cache responses to the common queries, that's something that's going to help you reduce costs significantly. And then compute resources, or looking at the usage of these compute resources, is going to help you generate these cost dashboards that Dataiku is going to leverage side by side with these projects you have in production, so that you have full visibility into how much your users are leveraging or consuming from the LLM side. And then permissions and moderation from sort of the data coming in or passing through these LLMs. So what we're going to look at, for example, is the option to limit the data sets that are allowed to be used as inputs to a given set of LLMs. We're going to add some PII detection as well. So we have a whole package under the hood here that's running and monitoring for PII tokens being passed as part of these LLM queries that your users might be running. And then toxicity detection as well. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. But all these efforts around monitoring your data coming through, but also coming out of some of these models. And then finally, built-in retrieval augmentation. Not much to talk about this beyond what everyone has covered today, but the ability to orchestrate a corpus of documents to be used as your RAG documents in order to get the best outputs possible from any given LLM in production. All of these are going to be native features to Dataiku. They are in private preview, but if you are users and want to leverage these, then that's something that we can talk about. Lastly, I just want to show very quickly what this might look like with a Snowflake architecture. So the nice part about using Dataiku and Snowflake together is that there are tons of different integrations that both product teams are building in order to seamlessly work between one another. So for example, Mo showed you guys a little bit on what a model might look like, say a Llama 2, in your given Snowpark container services. Now, the nice thing about using Dataiku is that we can use Snowpark right from Dataiku to be able to call on that model. And now you're using a Llama 2 model that is embedded or hosted by Snowpark, but you're using it and surfacing it through Dataiku, so you get that best of both worlds, where you get the best compute possible allocated to the right type of model, whereas you have the right type of UI and tools in Dataiku to be able to play around with that model and actually get use out of it. Any questions here before we jump into the demo? And then I had the RAG slide here, but as soon as you mentioned everyone's been talking about this RAG architecture and not the demo, I took that down. So last thing here before we start talking about LLM specifics, I can't tell if my screen is a little out of center here. One second. So I'm just going to give a very, very quick overview of Dataiku and Snowflake because it is relevant beyond just LLMs. But like I talked about in Dataiku, this is going to be an end-to-end pipeline. And I'll zoom in. I know it's very difficult to see right now. But the idea is that we're going to take care of everything from connecting to your data sources. So in blue, we have these data sets in the platform. You can see here we're grabbing data from an S3 bucket. We're pushing it to Snowflake so we can actually start leveraging Snowflake as a compute engine in Dataiku. Integration point number 1 with Snowflake is Snowflake as a data source. Integration number 2 is actually leveraging Snowflake as a compute engine. So we allow you to use a combination of visual tools as well as code-based tools. You can see the visual tools here, and then the code-based ones by their coding icons or their logos. And one thing I want to show, for example, is a visual recipe in Dataiku is quite simple. This is a join that's going to allow you to leverage Snowflake as a compute engine. And the screen is a little out of center here, so it's a little hard to see, but right at the bottom of my screen here, you can see I can pick compute engine for these recipes. And in this case, I'm going to run this in database, inherently leveraging Snowflake as my compute engine. And then this is also under the hood, turning this into actually a Snowflake query altogether. So I can either view it and keep leveraging it as a visual recipe, or I can convert it to an actual SQL query and maintain it as such. So with that, the rest of the Dataiku pipeline, you can see here I'm leveraging a Python recipe. Maybe that means I can leverage Snowpark right from here. Again, kind of orchestrating everything from the Dataiku side and then leveraging Snowflake in many various ways here. Once I get to the modeling portion, I can create a model, deploy it, and then actually leverage, again, Snowflake as a compute engine, this time as a Java UDF. So I'm taking that model that I've built in Dataiku, and I'm making it compatible to be ran as Snowflake Java UDF. There's no additional lift here. It's as simple as clicking a button. As long as you have Snowflake under the hood, it's going to leverage that as a compute engine. And then lastly, one of the core components of Dataiku is monitoring and MLOps. And so we won't get into how we actually deploy this. It's more clicking, more orchestrating. But as we deploy these projects in production, we also want to maintain with every run of every model or every version, I want to be able to understand what my data drift looks like, what my performance metrics look like, and then finally create a nice pipeline where I'm setting alerts based on these metrics, making sure that as these projects are deployed in production, there is some sense of control here where we're not just automating things blindly, but we're actually monitoring very closely with every run of this pipeline to make sure that nothing is breaking under the hood. So that's Dataiku as a general end-to-end ML tool. Now, LLMs come out and create all of these, all of this buzz, and to Dataiku, it's just another model. Yes, we've added a few features here to allow you to make the most possible use out of these LLMs. One of these things is I'm going to fix the screen once and for all. I keep kind of pushing this off. All right, hopefully that's good enough for now. Sorry, one more thing. If I go into full screen, I feel like that's going to fix it. All right, perfect. So this is the Prompt Engineering Studio. This is where users, again, traditional ML models allow you to iterate over these different set of parameters. You get a nice R2 score, an AUC score, and you understand, okay, this is how well the model is performing. And then you can also play around with all the different models. Maybe I want to use a decision tree, maybe just a typical regression model.
With LLMs, it's not that simple, right? What are you comparing? Or how do you compare the output of a Llama 2 versus OpenAI? Maybe you have multiple screens in your office, or you're splitting your screen many different ways. There's no easy way to do that. Dataiku's concept here is, again, we want to give users access to every single model that you can get your hands on. And the nice thing about this is that you can do this all in one screen. So here, you can see a few different sessions. So I have 2 sessions. We're talking about the same use case, so that call center transcripts here, where I'm giving information to the model here through this prompter screen. So I'm giving it as much or as little detail as I'd like. Of course, this is going to be very flexible depending on your use cases. If I want to actually leverage some data set inputs to this, I can use the text prompt task instead of the structured prompt that's kind of static here. I have an input data set that I'm going to actually score against or test against in this case. If I want to select the actual column here, I can give what am I scoring against? I'm a call center manager, and here I want to take a look at the review, which comes in the form of the column call transcript from my data set here. And then anyone here doing few shot analysis, or sorry, few shot training or tuning? Yeah. So here's a nice place that you can add that, where you can take an actual example that you know of. If the transcript says this, then this is what I expect the output to be. So this is yet another area where you can add a little bit more context to the model. And then in this case, it is a local model, but Dataiku also is capable here of surfacing cost to you. So we talked about using any LLM that you have access to. Here I have a Llama 2 just from Hugging Face, but we also just talked about how we integrate with Snowflake. So this is actually going to be a custom LLM that is deployed on a Snowflake container service. And I'm leveraging it here, for example, where you can simply just toggle between all of these different options. And then finally, I can run this against a few test examples, right? So based on this call transcript, so this is an input from my input data set, this is what the result is going to come out as. Right? And so I can use this as a testing ground to try to understand what's the best possible prompt for my desired use case. And then once I have all of this nicely set up, I can actually save this as a recipe. What that means is it's going to turn this into just another object in my flow, in my Dataiku flow, which it exists already. So we're going to go take a look at that without saving any of these examples. And simply what becomes of this is this nice recipe that is a summarizing recipe, because that is a task that we're doing here, where I have the same inputs that come through, I have the same prompt that come through. And then if I want to add a few additional parameters here, so the temperature, add maybe a maximum output tokens, as well as create a nice little output format based on, again, the type of data that you're interacting with, then that's something that we can do, and I can go back and forth here between the prompt studio and my Dataiku flow. Now, the nice thing about working on this from the Dataiku side is we can also give you additional tools here that allow you to post-process the output or do something with this output. And then we also talked about the ability to fine-tune. Dataiku does have a labeling capability. And so one thing that you're going to see here is that we're actually going to take the outputs of this summarizer, so the call center transcript summarizer. We're going to give it some feedback, which you can do through this screen. So I don't have anything, but I don't have anything in my docket to review. But this is the example here of how you would actually set up these labeling tasks. And then you can sort of close the loop by writing these back to that same model that, again, is hosted in Snowflake, and then have that continuous loop of improvement over time. So that's a simple summarizer type task. And lastly, what I want to talk about is RAG. And so here's a pipeline that is doing that RAG process. So you asked, one of the questions was, where do my documents live? Or how do I point to my documents? What format do they live in? This is an example here where we have this hosted file. So this hosted file can be on Snowflake. And this hosted file contains a variety of different output or different formats here. So I have a PDF, I have a docx as well, I have an HTML link. And the idea is that we're going to start with all of this unstructured data. In reality, you're going to have unstructured data alongside structured data or semi-structured data. So we're going to have all of these different data sources that are pointing back to a common source in Dataiku. So that's going to be one of the first values of leveraging Dataiku for a use case like this. After this, we're going to leverage a plugin here, so just another tool in Dataiku that's going to allow you to actually extract structured data and make meaning or turn your unstructured data into structured data. So that's going to create a file here that contains just a bunch of text. So now we can actually make use of this in the next steps. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a knowledge bank of that information. So in this case, we're going to embed all of the information, all of the data that we just saw come through. And here's where I mentioned using Pinecone, for example. So if you had Pinecone, you could leverage that as a data source to host or store all of these embeddings. If not, you can actually use Dataiku's native capabilities here. So we're just going to store them locally. This is not a huge use case, so we can do that. There's obviously going to be a nice meeting point where you might want to start looking into that for future use cases. But then we're going to do the same thing here, where we're going to take a look at some of the, and I have a colleague who's doing exactly what I'm doing right now, apparently. But what we're going to look at is which LLM do I want to use? So similar recipe that you just saw. Again, I can take a look at this or play around with it in Edit Prompt Studios. But the difference here is that I have retrieval augmented models I can pull from this time, right? So now I've created this ability to productionalize a pipeline that contains this RAG process. And then the same thing applies for the rest, right? So I'm going to sort of select and configure my input, configure the prompt to behave accordingly, as well as add some additional pieces of configuration here based on the model that I'm leveraging. But the output is going to be what you've seen already. So now I can take a look at the output here, where based on the question, I'm going to take a look at the LLM output here. So if I hover over this, it's going to show you a few different things. What I really like about the way we can configure these in Dataiku is we talked about citing sources as being a very important component. You can see an example of that happening here, where you actually know which one of your documents has created this particular output, or what did its source or cite here. So just another nice piece here to the puzzle. And then lastly, you'll see this column that's a reference answer. So what we're leveraging in the rest of this pipeline here is the ability to actually score the output or monitor the performance of the output of this particular model. So of course, there's many techniques here. Not saying that this is by any means industry standard or whatever it is. It's just an example of how you could use Dataiku to use an LLM just like any other model that Dataiku can help you leverage. And in this case, we're looking at answer relevancy, correctness. If you wanted to add toxicity scores here, that's something you can output as well. And then again, similar story to the rest of the pipeline in Dataiku, where you can create these thresholds to try to monitor this in production. So if my BERT score dips below a certain percentage, then that might mean that we're not as comfortable with this running in production. We might want to take this down, rebuild it, and then re-promote it back to production, and any one of these combinations as well.
How you measure the relevancy of the output?
So those are all custom approaches that we're leveraging using a Python script over here. So this Python script is making use of all open source packages. It's not doing anything that you can't do today. We're just simply creating a way to provide or to monitor it in this model evaluation store, which allows you to create that pipeline around it with thresholds and maximums and minimums that you're comfortable with.
Oh, okay. So the user sort of have to define that basically.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I think on the output from the AI, the recipe.
Yeah.
You have extra trait columns that seems
Yeah, so additional columns that this particular LLM could provide us with. So it's basically, if there is an error, then these will get populated. So if anything goes wrong in your pipeline, then you can understand what happened without necessarily breaking the entire process altogether. Yeah.
So in your prompt playground, different models might have different prompt format. Do you have good defaults for those?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's exactly what we're trying to do here with the prompt engineering or the prompt studios, is that, to your point, every model, if you were interacting with the API form of this, then all of the APIs are different. They might have a different set of inputs and configuration parameters. So what we're trying to do here is create a one-size-fits-all for you to be able to actually make the most of every one of these models. So Dataiku is going to abstract that away from you and allow the user to simply use this one unified UI no matter what LLM is under the hood.
Also for your built-in RAG, how configurable are the different components? Like, can I change my chunk size, all that kind of things?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what we're building towards. It is very early in our sort of release cycle. So like I said, it's in private preview. So this is a V2-ish of this process. So there may not be exactly everything you're looking for. We can sit down on the side and kind of dig through it and see what you think of it. But for the most part, it is, it's production ready or at this point in the process. So we have customers who are leveraging this to try to put together projects for production. And I think based on that, also we're getting a tremendous amount of learning to be able to kind of edit these before they make it to general availability. Any other questions at all? All right. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. Jason, anything you wanted to share with the group before we wrap up?
Yeah, so as you can tell behind you, the food's kind of come in. So
Okay.
it's kind of like heavy appetizers. So please enjoy. The bar's open. Kind of a pretty good spread there as well.
And we'd like, and just on behalf of Dataiku, Snowflake, and the Archetype team, we wanted to say thank you for joining us. And we're all available for questions, not only about the LLM world, the generative AI world, but also good old-fashioned exploratory data analysis and data movement and all that other good stuff that still exists. Thank you, Marty. Anything you wanted to say here?
No.
All right, great. As Jason said, please enjoy. Thank you very much. We'll be around. Ask us questions.